You won't believe what she did. For months, Marcus's mailbox kept getting destroyed. At first, he thought it was an accident, maybe some reckless teenagers. But then it kept happening, over and over, each time getting worse. It wasn't just vandalism, it was personal. So Marcus decided to find out who was behind it. And when he did, he uncovered a truth so shocking it would turn the entire neighborhood against one of their own. And let's just say, karma came knocking hard. For months, someone had been destroying Marcus Williams' mailbox, turning it into their personal stress relief toy. At first, he thought it was an accident, a careless driver clipping the post, maybe some kids fooling around. But as the damage worsened, it became crystal clear. This wasn't random. Someone was doing it on purpose. Marcus had never given much thought to his mailbox. It was just a standard black metal box at the edge of his driveway, like every other house on Oak Ridge Lane. But one morning, everything changed. He stepped outside, coffee in hand, ready to grab his mail before heading to work. But something was off. The mailbox door was hanging open, barely attached to its hinge. Letters were scattered across the ground, some soaked in the early morning dew. Marcus sighed, bending down to pick them up. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe the mailman had been a little rough. He made a mental note to tighten the screws later and went about his day. But 2 days later, it happened again. This time, the mailbox was bent at an awkward angle, as if someone had taken a swing at it. Marcus frowned, rubbing his hand over his face. Maybe some bored teenagers were messing around looking for cheap thrills. Annoying? Absolutely. Worth losing sleep over? Not yet. He straightened the mailbox as best he could and went inside. Then it happened again, and again, and again. Each time, the damage got worse. The door was ripped off completely one morning. Another day, the entire post was leaning dangerously, as if someone had tried to pull it from the ground. But the final straw came one chilly November evening. Marcus walked outside to take out the trash when he spotted what remained of his mailbox, shattered into pieces, lying in the gutter like it had been beaten with a sledgehammer. His jaw clenched. This wasn't some harmless prank. This was intentional. He took a deep breath, pushing down the frustration rising inside him. He had better things to do than play detective over a mailbox. Still, when he went to the hardware store the next day to buy a replacement, the man behind the counter raised an eyebrow. "Another one?" he asked, pulling a new mailbox from the shelf. Marcus let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, been having some bad luck, I guess," the guy grunted, setting the box down. "Bad luck? Or someone got a problem with you?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't want to. He paid in cash, drove home in silence, and installed the new mailbox, securing it with fresh screws and double-checking the stability of the post. But as he stepped back to admire his work, something gnawed at the back of his mind. This wasn't just about the mailbox. The glares from across the street when he first moved in, the wrong mail constantly ending up in his box, always missing important bills, yet somehow collecting junk. The anonymous HOA letters about keeping the community's aesthetic intact, oddly enough, only sent to him. Marcus wasn't stupid. He'd seen this before. Still, he tried to brush it off. He wasn't here to cause trouble. He worked hard, paid his mortgage, minded his business. That should have been enough. But it wasn't. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, he made a decision. If it happened again, just one more time, he was going to find out exactly who was behind it. And something told him he wouldn't have to wait long. Marcus didn't have to wait long. Just 2 nights after installing the new mailbox, he was jolted awake by a dull metallic clang echoing through the quiet neighborhood. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. The kind of sound that made his stomach tighten with anger before his brain even caught up. He sat up in bed, heart pounding. He didn't need to guess what had happened. He already knew. But instead of rushing outside like some hot-headed fool, Marcus reached for his phone and pulled up his security camera feed. 2 days earlier, he had installed a motion-activated camera on his front porch, angling it just right to capture the mailbox. He hadn't told anyone, not even himself. At least, that's what he'd tried to believe. But now, as he tapped the screen, the answer was staring back at him. Rebecca Langley, his next-door neighbor. The same woman who had lived in that house for over a decade. The same woman who had barely spoken 3 words to him in the year since he moved in. Except for that one time when she had oh so casually said, Some of us actually care about keeping the neighborhood nice. And there she was, standing in the glow of a nearby street lamp, gripping a wooden baseball bat with both hands. Marcus could hardly believe what he was seeing. This wasn't some stupid kids playing a prank. This was deliberate. On the screen, Rebecca lifted the bat again, adjusting her stance like she was warming up for a home run. His mailbox was already dented. She must have hit it once before he started watching. Now she swung again. A sharp, brutal crack filled the night air as the bat connected with steel. The mailbox wobbled on its post but stayed standing. Another hit. This time, the door snapped clean off, landing in the grass. Rebecca exhaled, almost satisfied. Then she took one last swing before lowering the bat and walking casually back toward her house, as if she had just taken out the trash. Marcus sat frozen, gripping his phone so tightly his fingers hurt. He had proof. He had the truth. And now he had a decision to make. Anger flared up inside him like wildfire, but he took a deep breath, forcing himself to think. Reacting out of rage wouldn't help. This wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. This was about her wanting him gone. The next morning, he didn't say anything. He waited. Sure enough, around noon, Rebecca came strolling down her driveway to check her mail, just like she did every day. She didn't glance at him, but Marcus knew she was expecting a reaction. She wanted him to explode. She wanted him to march over, yell, cause a scene, something she could use against him. Instead, he gave her nothing. She reached into her mailbox, pulled out a few envelopes, and turned to head back inside. That's when Marcus finally spoke. His voice was calm, but it was sharp enough to cut. "Got some good swings in last night, huh?" Rebecca froze mid-step. For a split second, she didn't move. Then she turned slowly, forcing a fake laugh. "Excuse me?" Marcus tilted his head and held up his phone, tapping the screen. The footage played in perfect clarity. Her, the bat, the destruction, the casual walk home. Rebecca's expression changed fast. Her fake smile twitched. For the first time since he moved in, she actually looked rattled. But she recovered quickly, straightening her shoulders and tilting her chin up. "That's not me." Marcus let out a low, disbelieving chuckle. "You sure? Because it looks a lot like you." Rebecca's nostrils flared. "You're harassing me." Marcus didn't even blink. "You're destroying my property." She crossed her arms, lips pressing into a thin, smug line. "Prove it." Marcus smiled. "Already did." He let the words sink in. Rebecca opened her mouth, then closed it. She wasn't used to being cornered. She liked control, but she didn't have any now. Her arms tightened around her chest. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed back into her house, slamming the door behind her. Marcus exhaled slowly, watching her retreat. He had the proof. He had the upper hand. But something told him this wasn't over, not even close. Marcus had hoped that catching Rebecca on camera would be enough to make her stop. That maybe, just maybe, she'd feel a shred of embarrassment or even fear at being exposed. But people like her, they don't back down that easily. The first sign of escalation came the very next morning. Marcus stepped outside, stretching, expecting another uneventful day. Instead, his stomach twisted. A pile of garbage, actual stinking trash, had been dumped right at the base of his freshly replaced mailbox. At first he thought maybe an animal had gotten into someone's bin. But then he noticed the details, the way the bags were carefully ripped open, the way the contents were scattered across his yard but nowhere else. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Marcus exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. He looked up, toward Rebecca's house. The curtains shifted, just slightly, but he saw it. She was watching. All right, so that's how she wanted to play. Marcus took a deep breath, turned around and grabbed a pair of gloves. He didn't yell. He didn't react. He simply cleaned up every last piece of trash and threw it away. He refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him lose his temper. But that was just the beginning. That night, while Marcus sat on his porch enjoying the rare cool breeze, he heard it, a loud screeching sound. His head snapped toward the street just in time to see a white SUV peeling away, and his mailbox knocked to the ground. Marcus gripped the armrest of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. She was using her car now? He could feel the heat rising in his chest, that old familiar anger clawing its way up, but he forced himself to stay still, to breathe. She wanted him to react. She wanted him to explode. She wanted to paint herself as the victim, so he didn't give her that. Instead, he went inside, pulled up the security footage, and saved everything. The garbage, the SUV, the repeated destruction. He labeled each file, dated them, and made sure Rebecca's face was clearly visible in the earlier videos. Then he made a decision. If she wanted to play dirty, fine, but she was about to find out that Marcus wasn't an easy target. The next morning, Marcus drove across town to a metalwork shop. He spent nearly an hour talking to the owner, explaining exactly what he needed. By the end of the conversation, he had ordered something that would make sure Rebecca never touched his mailbox again. A reinforced steel mailbox. Not just any mailbox. The kind designed to withstand anything. Thick, heavy, secured into the ground with concrete. But that wasn't all. Marcus had one more request. A low-voltage deterrent. Not dangerous. Not enough to hurt someone, but strong enough to give a nasty little shock to anyone stupid enough to swing at it. The guy at the shop laughed when Marcus explained what was happening. "Man, that's some next-level pettiness," he said, shaking his head. "But I like it. She won't see it coming." Marcus smirked. "That's the point." 2 days later, the mailbox was installed. It stood taller, stronger, unbreakable. A monument, a statement. Marcus stepped back, hands on his hips, admiring his work. Let's see what she tries now. And he wouldn't have to wait long. Marcus didn't have to wait long. That very night at 11:45 p.m., his phone buzzed with a motion alert from his security camera. He was already awake, half expecting it. Something told him Rebecca wasn't done. He tapped the notification, and the live feed loaded. And there she was, Rebecca Langley, standing in front of his brand-new reinforced steel mailbox, bat in hand. Marcus almost laughed. She didn't even hesitate. The second she stepped onto the curb, she raised the bat. Her stance wide, her grip tight, she was determined to destroy it again. Except this time, she had no idea what was coming. Marcus leaned forward, watching closely. The first swing connected hard. He saw the force ripple through her arms as the bat struck the steel, but instead of denting or bending like before, it barely made a sound. Rebecca's expression changed. She adjusted her grip, swung again. Crack! The impact jolted up her arms, but the mailbox didn't budge, not an inch. Rebecca stepped back, breathing heavy, clearly frustrated. Marcus smirked. "Oh, you're mad now?" He kept watching. He knew she wasn't done. He could see it, in the way she squared her shoulders, how she refused to accept defeat. She took a final step forward, gripping the bat like it was a weapon, and then she swung with everything she had. The moment the bat connected, a sharp, bright spark flashed where the metal met metal. And then Rebecca screamed. Her entire body jerked backward as the low-voltage shock hit her. The bat flew from her hands, clattering onto the pavement. She stumbled, arms flailing, and landed hard on the ground. For a second, she just sat there, breathing fast, hands shaking, disoriented, like she couldn't figure out what had just happened. Then, rage. Rebecca scrambled to her feet, stumbling a little, and turned toward the mailbox like it had personally insulted her. Her fists clenched, her face twisted in fury. Marcus could barely hold in his laughter now. Now she was really mad. She opened her mouth, probably to curse or scream or let out whatever nonsense was brewing in her head. But then, she saw it. The red blinking light on the security camera. Her entire body went still. Marcus could see it. The exact moment she realized what this meant, that her attack had been recorded, that there was proof. For the first time, she looked afraid. Her head snapped toward the street, probably hoping no one else had seen her. And then, without another word, she turned and ran, slamming the door behind her. Marcus sat back, exhaling slowly, and then he laughed. A deep, satisfied laugh that rumbled in his chest. Checkmate. But he wasn't done yet. He reached for his phone, replaying the footage, every single second of it. The attack, the shock, the fall, the sheer panic in her eyes. And then, he hit save. Rebecca had spent months trying to intimidate him, trying to push him out, trying to break him. But tonight, she finally got what she deserved. And in the morning, the entire neighborhood was going to know about it. Morning came, and Marcus knew before he even stepped outside. The entire street was buzzing. He could hear it through his window. The hushed voices of neighbors talking, the occasional chuckle, the unmistakable tension of something big having happened. By the time he walked out onto his porch, a small group had already gathered near his mailbox. Some stood with their arms crossed, shaking their heads. Others simply stared. Not at the mailbox, but at Rebecca's house. A few of them whispered among themselves, stealing quick glances toward Marcus. One of his older neighbors, Mr. Holloway, let out a low whistle as he nudged the metal post with his shoe. "Damn thing looks brand new," he muttered, scratching his head. "Didn't even dent." Marcus smirked. "Wasn't supposed to." Before he could say anything else, he noticed Rebecca standing in her yard, arms crossed, her face pale as a sheet. She wasn't looking at him. She wasn't looking at anyone. She was staring straight at the sidewalk, as if she wanted to sink into it and disappear. Then, Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor, Camille. "OMG, did you see next door?" He raised an eyebrow and tapped open the app. And there it was. Someone, not him, had uploaded the footage. His finger hovered over the play button, but he didn't even need to press it. The comments told him everything. "She's been doing this for months. WTF. LMAO, I can't stop watching her hit the ground." So she's been harassing him this whole time and then tried to play the victim? Unreal. This is embarrassing. Honestly, the HOA needs to do something about her. Rebecca's dirty laundry completely aired out, and she knew it. Marcus glanced back toward her house just in time to see her storm inside, slamming the door shut. A few people chuckled. "Guess she didn't expect to go viral," someone muttered. But the amusement didn't last long. A few minutes later, police showed up. A patrol car rolled onto the street, stopping right in front of Rebecca's driveway. 2 officers stepped out, one of them holding a clipboard. They didn't even need to knock. Rebecca must have been watching because she opened the door before they reached the porch. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he didn't need to. The body language said it all. Rebecca's arms waved frantically, her voice rising in protest. The officers remained calm but firm. Then, one of them pointed toward Marcus's house, toward the mailbox, and then her face crumpled. Marcus knew what was happening. They were telling her exactly what she already knew: the destruction of property, the repeated harassment, the fact that she was caught on camera. She was in real trouble now. And for the first time in months, Marcus finally felt at peace. But before he turned to head back inside, he noticed something. A woman, one of his newer neighbors, someone he hadn't spoken to much, stood at the edge of her lawn. She was staring at him, not in a bad way, more like regretful. Then, after a moment, she walked over. "Hey," she said quietly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I just wanted to say I had no idea she was doing all that." Marcus nodded, not sure where she was going with it. She sighed. "I should have said something earlier. I noticed the mail thing, the trash, but I didn't want to get involved." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then he shrugged. "You see it now." She swallowed hard. "Yeah, I do." Marcus let that hang in the air for a second. Then, before she could say anything else, he simply said, "Better late than never." And he meant it. Because today, Rebecca wasn't just exposed, she was finally being held accountable, and that was justice enough. Epilogue. When karma comes knocking, Rebecca Langley's fall from grace was faster than anyone expected. By the end of the week, she was the talk of the neighborhood. It wasn't just the security footage, though that certainly didn't help. It was the police report, the HOA complaints, the realization that she had been harassing Marcus for months. People who once waved at her now avoided eye contact. A few even crossed the street when they saw her coming. And Rebecca? She had never looked more miserable. She barely left the house. When she did, it was quick and careful. No more smug glances, no more passive-aggressive remarks. Just a woman who knew she had lost. Marcus didn't go out of his way to rub it in. He didn't have to. The neighborhood had already done that for him. But there was one last moment of reckoning. It happened late one afternoon, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. Marcus was watering his lawn when he heard footsteps approaching. He turned, and there she was, Rebecca. She looked different, not angry, not smug, just defeated. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice so low he almost didn't hear it, she muttered, "I didn't mean for it to get this bad." Marcus just stared at her. She shifted on her feet, struggling for words. I was just... She stopped, exhaled sharply. She couldn't finish. Because she knew. There was no excuse, no justification, no version of this where she wasn't the problem. Marcus let the silence drag for a moment. Then finally he spoke. "Yeah, you did." Rebecca swallowed hard. She lifted a hand like she wanted to say more. But she didn't. She just turned and walked away. That was the last real conversation they ever had. A few weeks later, the house went up for sale. Marcus didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He just watched from his porch as Rebecca packed up her life and drove away. And when the moving truck finally disappeared down the street, he let out a breath he hadn't even realized he was holding. Not because he won, but because he finally got his peace back. Final thoughts. Some people think they can get away with anything, that their actions have no consequences, that they can bully, manipulate, and destroy without ever facing the fallout. But sooner or later, the truth catches up. Rebecca thought she was untouchable. She wasn't, and when karma finally came knocking, she had no choice but to answer. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. What do you think about how karma played out in this situation? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And remember, what you put into the world always comes back to you. Stay tuned for more incredible stories.